Welcome back to the deep dive. If you're keeping tabs on data governance and compliance, especially, in the Asia-Pacific region, you'll know things are moving incredibly fast.
Yeah.
The regulatory landscape is definitely shifting. We actually just got back from ASA CyberCon down in Melbourne.
Oh, yeah. How was that?
It was great, actually. Really insightful. Thousands of cyber professionals there, loads of good conversations.
Good stuff. Always a valuable event.
Absolutely. But there was one particular session that really stood out. It was called Regulatory Fallout, Privacy Breaches and Legal Obligations to Protect Personal Information.
Okay. I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, it dove straight into the legal side of things, specifically focusing on a really critical court case.
Right. You must mean the Australian Clinical Labs case, ACL versus the Australian Information Commissioner, the OAIC.
Exactly that one.
Yeah, that case. It's more than just another fine for a data breach, isn't it? The federal court's decision there, it's genuinely a watershed moment. It sort of redraws the lines for cybersecurity governance expectations in Australia.
And probably beyond Australia, really.
Yeah.
For anyone handling sensitive data.
Oh, absolutely. Globally, the principles apply.
So our mission today is really to dig into that court judgment, look at the OAIC's enforcement action, and pull out the key lessons. Because this isn't just about, pathology results.
Yeah. Oh.
It sets a definitive legal benchmark, doesn't it?
Yeah.
For what reasonable steps actually means when it comes to protecting personal information. Especially, and this is crucial, in that messy context of mergers and acquisitions.
Precisely. M&A is a huge factor here.
Honestly, for any organization, big or small, this case feels like mandatory reading now.
I'd agree. You could almost call it a curriculum, albeit a very expensive one, enforced by that $5.8 million civil penalty.
Yeah.
So the OAIC took action against ACL. It stemmed from that cyber attack back in February 2022. And it wasn't on ACL's main systems, but on a subsidiary they'd just bought, Medlab Pathology.
Right.
And the allegations, they hit 3 distinct failures under the Privacy Act 1988. 3 core duties ACL just didn't meet.
Okay, what were those?
Well, first, the big one. The basic duty to secure the data. A systemic failure to protect personal information. That's a breach of Australian Privacy Principle 11.1.
APP 11.1.
Got it. Second, the duty to investigate properly. They failed to assess the data breach reasonably or promptly after they found out about it. That breaches Section 26 WH2.
Okay, failure to assess.
And third, the duty to report. They failed to notify the OAIC as soon as practicable once they knew, or should have known, it was a serious breach. That's Section 26 WK2.
Right. Secure, assess, report. 3 strikes. Okay, let's unpack this. Starting at the beginning seems logical.
Oh.
What's the context here? Who is ACL and how did this acquisition set everything in motion?
Good place to start. So Australian Clinical Labs, ICL, they're not a small player, they're huge. ASX listed, one of Australia's biggest private hospital pathology providers.
We're talking significant scale here.
Absolutely. Revenue was nearly $1 billion in FY 2022, over 5,000 staff. And that scale, that market position, it's really important because the court directly linked it to the standard of care expected. More resources, more responsibility.
Makes sense. And their whole business revolves around sensitive data.
Exactly. It's their bread and butter. They collect and hold enormous amounts of highly sensitive patient health information. Test results, obviously, but also contact details, Medicare card numbers, passport copies, even full credit card details.
Wow. So the stakes are incredibly high from the get-go.
Maximum stakes. When your entire business model is built on trust and handling confidential health data about fertility, prenatal health, serious conditions, the expected standard of care just shoots right up. The court saw it that way, too.
And the breach itself, as you said, wasn't on their main network. It originated from an acquisition, right? Medlab Pathology.
That's the crux of it. ACL acquired Medlab Pathology's assets, including their computer networks, systems, software, back in December 2021. Now, Medlab wasn't insignificant either. They handled about 1.5 million patient episodes a year, held sensitive data on over 100,000 people. Think prenatal genetic tests, fertility assessments, really sensitive stuff.
And this is where the problems began, with the acquisition process itself.
This is precisely where the legal liability started to crystallize. The court found ACL did not carry out a sufficient cybersecurity assessment before buying Medlab.
They didn't do their homework properly.
Worse than that. The court found ACL actually knew before they closed the deal. They knew Medlab hadn't done any IT penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, or security audits for the previous 3 years.
3 years. Wow. So they knew they were buying a fixer-upper, cybersecurity-wise. A big one.
They knew they were inheriting significant risk, a ticking time bomb, essentially.
In knowing that risk, what did they do? Did they jump on it immediately?
That's the critical failure. No, they didn't. They treated the Medlab network as this separate, almost quarantined entity. They had plans to migrate the data and decommission Medlab systems, sure, but that integration project dragged on.
How long are we talking?
It wasn't finished until around July 2022. So from December 2021 to July 2022, that's over 6 months.
6 months running a network they knew was vulnerable, unpatched, unaudited.
Connected to the internet, exposed. The court viewed this integration period as, well, negligent. A failure of governance. You called it a toxic integration period, and that's a pretty accurate description.
And predictably, someone found that weakness.
Almost immediately. The attackers, identified as the Quantum Group ransomware gang, found that exposed flank. The attack happened on or before February 25, 2022, so just a couple of months after the acquisition closed.
And they didn't just encrypt files, did they? Ransomware often involves data theft now.
Exactly. That's the crucial part here. They exfiltrated data, a lot of it. 86 gigabytes.
86 gigs. How many people were affected?
The court documents state data belonging to at least 223,269 individuals was stolen.
Over 220,000 people. And the type of data, let's revisit that because it really underscores the serious interference with privacy finding by the court.
It's pretty much a worst-case scenario data set. Health records, yes.
Yeah.
But also passport numbers. Over 128,000 Medicare records. And complete credit card information.
Complete meaning.
Names, the full card numbers, expiry dates, and the CVV security codes. Everything needed for fraudulent transactions.
That combination. Health data, identity documents, financial data. All in one place.
It's what we call maximal aggregation risk. It's a gold mine for criminals. Identity theft, financial fraud, targeted extortion, it's all enabled by that data set.
Yeah.
Think about the impact. Someone's prenatal genetic testing results combined with their passport number and credit card details, the potential for targeted scams, blackmail, immense psychological harm, it's huge. The OAIC commissioner really emphasized this point, the real-world, long-lasting risk this data being on the dark web created for individuals. And the court definitely took that potential harm very seriously when deciding on the penalties.
Right. Okay, let's shift gears then. Section 2. This is where, as you said, it gets really interesting because the court wasn't just focused on the breach itself, but the underlying systemic failures that arguably made it inevitable. This led to that huge $4.2 million chunk of the penalty, specifically for failing to protect the data under BPP 11.1.
Exactly. That $4.2 million, that component of the fine, is where the legal ground really shifted. The court zeroed in on the obligation under APP 11.1b. ACL had to take such steps as were reasonable in the circumstances to protect the information.
Reasonable steps. That phrase can be tricky. How did the court interpret it here?
Objectively. And the bar was set very high. They looked at ACL's size, that billion-dollar revenue figure. They looked at the extreme sensitivity of the health data they handled. And they concluded that reasonable steps for ACL meant having a sophisticated, mature, and importantly, well-funded cybersecurity posture.
Well-funded. And the evidence showed the opposite.
Starkly the opposite. It's almost hard to believe. For the financial year 2022, this nearly billion-dollar company handling incredibly sensitive health data had a dedicated cybersecurity budget of only $350,000.
$350,000.
For cybersecurity.
That was the dedicated budget. The court explicitly called this figure significantly lower than industry standards for a company of ACL's size and risk profile.
What was their total IT budget, just for context?
Only $1.3 million.
Yeah.
That covered everything, systems, maintenance, the lot. So cybersecurity was a tiny fraction of an already small IT spend. The court didn't just see it as inadequate, they saw it as systemic negligence, a failure at the governance level.
A billion-dollar company handling data like that. Less than 0.4% of the IT spend on security. How could the board possibly justify that level of under-resourcing? Did the court address that? They saw it as a fundamental failure to grasp the risk, or perhaps a deliberate choice to underinvest. Not malicious, maybe, but a failure to treat cybersecurity as a core business risk, a fiduciary duty that needed resourcing proportionate to the threat and the sensitivity of the data.
And the budget issue cascaded down, didn't it?
Yeah.
It affected staffing.
Directly. Compounding the tiny budget, ACL had 0 full-time employees dedicated solely to cybersecurity during that critical period.
0. Who was responsible then?
It was tacked onto the responsibilities of the head of technical services, someone who, the court noted, already had a huge portfolio and, crucially, lacked formal cybersecurity qualifications or specific experience in managing a modern security program or responding to a major cyber attack.
So not enough money led to not enough dedicated people, which inevitably led to basic failures.
Complete failure of basic cyber hygiene. The judgment reads like a checklist of foundational security controls that were just missing or broken, and the court made it clear these aren't just best practices anymore. Under APP 11.1, for an organization like ACL, they are legal requirements.
Let's walk through that checklist. What were the specific failures the court highlighted? Because these are the things every company needs to be looking at now.
Okay, first, logging. Basic visibility. On the Medlab network, the firewall logs were only kept for 1 hour.
1 hour. That's useless for any real investigation.
It cripples forensics. An attacker could be in the network for days, weeks. If you only have the last hour of logs, you have no idea how they got in, what they did, if they're still there. It's choosing blindness.
It sounds less like negligence and more like actively preventing accountability.
The court certainly viewed it dimly. Then authentication. Multi-factor authentication, MFA. It wasn't consistently implemented across ACL's own network, which is bad enough. But critically, it was not required at all for remote access the VPN into that vulnerable, acquired Medlab network.
So the weakest point, the newly acquired, known vulnerable network, had the weakest access control. No MFA on the VPN.
None required. It's like leaving the front door not just unlocked, but wide open. That's probably how Quantum got initial access.
And inside, were the systems up to date?
No. They were running legacy Windows servers that hadn't been supported by Microsoft since January 2020.
So 2 years without security patches. Publicly known vulnerabilities just sitting there.
Exactly. Easy pickings for an attacker like Quantum.
What about detecting an attack in progress or data leaving the network?
Also missing. The judgment specifically called out the lack of data loss prevention, or DLT tools. Nothing to automatically flag or block large amounts of sensitive data being copied out.
Okay.
No application whitelisting either. That means any malicious software the attackers deployed could run unchecked. And no modern behavioral analysis tools, the kind that spot unusual activity, like an admin account suddenly accessing strange files or trying to move across the network. Basic detection capabilities were absent.
And the overarching failure was knowing about this toxic environment because they acquired it and just letting it sit there.
Precisely. They failed to properly assess and, crucially, remediate those inherited risks from Medlab immediately upon acquisition. They chose to wait for that long integration project instead of tackling the known critical vulnerabilities straight away.
And the court hammered them for that inaction.
That was the core of the $4.2 million fine for breaching APP 11.1. The court's message is crystal clear. The failure of proactive defense, getting the basics right, like governance, budgeting, MFA, logging, patching, is judged much more harshly than failures in the response after a breach. The primary duty is to prevent the breach in the first place.
Okay, so that covers the failure to protect. Let's move to the next stage. The incident response itself. The failures in assessment and notification after the attack was actually detected around February 25th, 2022. This brings us to those other breaches, Section 26WH2 and Section 26WH2.
Right. The duty to investigate and the duty to report. And the initial response, which under Section 26WH2 needed to be a reasonable and expeditious assessment to determine if it was an eligible data breach or EDB. Well, it was deeply flawed from the start. The court pointed fingers directly at the internal team leading the response. As we mentioned, they were led by personnel who lacked formal cybersecurity qualifications and didn't have the specific experience needed to handle a major ransomware incident involving a known aggressive threat group.
They did bring in external help, though, right? A consultant, Stickman Cyber.
They did, but relying on a consultant doesn't absolve the company of responsibility. And crucially, the consultant's investigation itself was found to be inadequate.
What was wrong with it?
The scope was incredibly narrow. They only reviewed 3 out of 121 affected computers.
3 out of 121. That seems statistically insignificant.
Exactly. And they were hampered by that 1 hour of log data. Based on this very limited review, they concluded wrongly that no data had actually been exfiltrated.
And ACL accepted that conclusion.
They did. This goes back to what you might call the intelligent customer principle. The internal management, even if relying on external experts, needs the competence to scrutinize the advice they're given. They should have immediately questioned that methodology. Only 3 machines, relying on non-existent logs. It wasn't rigorous.
So based on this flawed advice, ACL decided.
By March 21st, 2022, they formally determined that the incident was not an eligible data breach. No need to notify the OAIC or affected individuals.
But the court found this reliance was unreasonable. When should they have suspected an EDB?
Much earlier. The court said ACL had reasonable grounds to suspect an EDB by March 1st, 2022. Why? Because the Quantum Group themselves had sent a ransom note, and that note explicitly said they had downloaded a huge volume of information.
The attackers told them they took the data.
They literally told them. That claim alone should have triggered alarm bells and maximum investigative effort, not a minimal review. So ACL failed both parts of Section 26WH2. The assessment wasn't reasonable, and it wasn't completed within the mandatory 30-day time frame allowed for assessment once reasonable suspicion arises.
And then they doubled down on this mistake, didn't they? They received external warnings.
They did, and ignored them. On March 25th, 2022, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, the ACSC, the government's lead agency, formally notified ACL. They had intelligence suggesting Medlab was compromised and explicitly reminded ACL of their legal notification duties.
What was ACL's response to the ACSC?
They essentially refused to reopen the investigation. They told the ACSC their own monitoring, based on that flawed Stickman cyber report, showed no data exfiltration. They stuck to their initial inadequate assessment.
Unbelievable. For how long?
For months. It wasn't until June 16, 2022 that things changed.
What happened on June 16th?
The ACSC came back with definitive proof. They provided confirmation that, yes, 86 gigabytes of Medlab data, ACL's data, had been found published by the Quantum Group on the dark web. Irrefutable evidence.
So only then, with the data literally posted online, did ACL accept reality.
Only then was ACL finally satisfied, as the legal term goes, that data had been exfiltrated and an eligible data breach had occurred. And that triggered their absolute duty under Section 26WK2 to notify the OAIC.
Okay, so June 16th, they knew for sure. Section 26WKO says notify as soon as practicable. How soon was that?
Well, it wasn't very soon. The notification to the OAIC wasn't actually submitted until July 10th, 2022.
July 10th. That's, let's see, 24 days later.
24 days. The court considered that a serious delay and a clear breach of the as soon as practicable requirement.
Why is that delay so serious?
Because the whole point of prompt notification is mitigation. It allows the regulator, and crucially, the individuals whose data was stolen, to take immediate steps. Cancel credit cards, change passwords, watch for identity theft, set up credit monitoring. Every single day of delay increases the potential harm.
What did the court think was practicable?
The OAIC argued, and the court seemed to agree, that notification should have happened much faster, probably within 2 to 3 working days of that June 16th confirmation. 24 days was deemed far too long.
And did the investigation reveal why it took so long? Were there internal issues?
Yes, the judgment also pointed to gaps in ACL's internal preparedness. Their incident response playbooks were generic, apparently. They lacked clear roles and responsibilities, didn't have specific detail and containment steps, and even recommended actions for technologies that weren't actually deployed on the vulnerable Medlab systems.
So a systemic failure from prevention right through to response and reporting.
A complete chain of failures, really, rooted in governance, resource allocation, technical controls, and response capability.
Right. So 3 clear breaches established. Failure to secure, APP 11.1, failure to assess reasonably, S26WH2, and failure to notify promptly, S26WK2. The OAIC pursued penalties leading to this landmark judgment.
Exactly. The federal court delivered its judgment, I believe it was October 8th, 2025, notionally for our discussion timeline here, finding ACL had contravened Section 13G of the Privacy Act. And crucially, these contraventions constituted a serious interference with the privacy of those 223,000-plus individuals.
And penalty.
A total civil penalty of $5.8 million. Plus, ACL was ordered to pay $400,000 towards the commissioner's legal costs.
And this was significant because
it was the first time a civil penalty had ever been imposed under the Privacy Act 1988. It set the precedent.
Let's look at that $5.8 million breakdown again. How did the court allocate it across the 3 breaches? Because that tells a story.
It absolutely does. The allocation sends a very clear message. The lion's share, $4.2 million, that's nearly 3/4 of the total fine, was for the APP 11.1 failures. the systemic negligence in protecting the data in the first place. The other two breaches, the response failures, the delay in assessment under S26WH2 and the delay in notification under S26WH2, each received $800,000.
So $4.2 million for prevention failures, $1.6 million total for response failures.
Precisely. The court legally prioritized prevention. The paramount obligation, carrying the heaviest penalty, is getting your security right before an attack happens. Proactive defense outweighs reactive response, financially speaking.
Now, there's a really critical legal point here about how the court calculated the potential liabilities in there, the multiplier effect.
Yes, this is fundamental to understanding the future implications. The court didn't just find one breach of APP 11.1, it found approximately 223,000 contraventions of Section 13GA stemming from that APP 11.1 failure.
How did they reach that number?
One contravention for each individual whose privacy was seriously interfered with by the failure to protect their data.
So liability is calculated per affected person, not just per incident.
That's the huge takeaway. The Privacy Act, according to this judgment, protects individual privacy rights. So ACL's systemic failure wasn't just one mistake. It was a separate contravention against every single one of the 223,000 plus people whose data was exposed due to that failure.
That methodology.
Yeah.
It scales massively for large breaches.
It weaponizes scale against large data holders. Now, think about the maximum penalty at the time ACL's conduct occurred. This was before the law changed in late 2022.
Right. What was the old maximum?
It was $2.22 million per contravention.
Okay. So $2.22 million times 223,000 contraventions.
Do the math. The theoretical maximum penalty the court could have imposed under that framework was over $495 billion.
All right, $495 billion. That's astronomical. Obviously theoretical, but still.
It shows the potential scale of liability even under the old rules when you apply that per individual contravention model.
So why only $5.8 million in the end?
That huge gap highlights that the penalty was significantly constrained by the old penalty regime. The court likely considered factors like proportionality, ACL's capacity to pay, and the mitigating factors. But the key point is they were operating under the $2.22 million cap per contravention.
Which means this $5.8 million, the first ever civil penalty, is effectively the historical minimum benchmark for this kind of systemic failure involving this many people.
Exactly. It's the baseline set under the old rules. Now consider the new laws that came into effect in December 2022.
What changed?
The maximum penalties increased dramatically. Now, for serious or repeated interferences with privacy, the penalty for corporations can be the greater of $50 million, 3 times the value of the benefit obtained from the conduct, or if the benefit can't be determined, 30% of the company's adjusted turnover during the relevant period.
30% of turnover.
Yes. So if a court applies the same per individual liability reasoning established in the ACL case, but uses these new, much higher penalty caps, well, future breaches of this scale aren't just looking at major fines. They could face genuinely company-threatening financial sanctions. The $5.8 million is effectively the last relatively small penalty we might see for a breach this size. It was a warning shot.
We should probably quickly mention the mitigating factors.
Yeah.
The court didn't completely ignore ACL's actions, did it?
No, they did acknowledge some things. ACL cooperated with the OAIC's investigation. They didn't have a history of previous breaches. The court found the misconduct wasn't deliberately malicious, more negligent. The CEO issued a public apology.
And they took steps after the fact.
Yes, they implemented mandated cybersecurity training for staff and significantly hired a dedicated Chief Information Security Officer, a CISO, in 2023, something they lacked during the breach period. These factors likely helped keep the penalty at $5.8 million under the old regime.
But despite those factors, the core message remains. This case is effectively a compulsory course for anyone handling sensitive data. So let's distill it. What are the absolute non-negotiable lessons that organizations need to take away from this judgment?
Okay, lesson number 1 has to be about mergers and acquisitions. M&A cyber due diligence cannot be a checkbox exercise anymore. It has to be technical, thorough, and it's non-delegable. You can't just rely on warranties. You need deep technical audits before you sign on the dotted line and inherit someone else's network.
And if you find problems during due diligence?
You have to act immediately. The judgment punishes inaction. If you identify critical vulnerabilities like unsupported OSs, lack of MFA, poor logging, you either need to ensure they are fixed before integration, or you need to isolate that network completely, air gap it if necessary, until it is fixed. Delaying remediation for a long, complex integration project, as ACL did, is no longer acceptable. That's instant liability.
Okay, M&A due diligence is critical and technical. Lesson 2.
Lesson 2 flows directly from the APP 11.1 finding. It's about those reasonable steps. This case basically puts budget holders on notice. Your security investment must be demonstrably proportionate to the sensitivity and volume of the data you hold and the risks you face. That tiny $350,000 budget for ACL was Exhibit A in systemic negligence. Low budgets are no longer just poor practice. They're a legal liability.
And it elevates basic controls to legal requirements.
Absolutely. The court has spoken. MFA, especially for remote access and privileged accounts, is not optional. Robust logging, meaning retention for weeks or months, not 1 hour, is essential for detection and response. Continuously patching systems or isolating decommissioning unsupported legacy systems is mandatory. Failure on these fundamentals is failure to take reasonable steps. Full stop.
Got it. And lesson 3.
Incident response maturity. First, accountability is non-delegable. You can hire consultants, but management retains responsibility. You need enough internal expertise, that intelligent customer capability, to properly scope the investigation, understand the findings, and challenge flawed or inadequate advice. ACL's unquestioning reliance on the limited Stickman cyber report was a key failure.
Forensic rigor is essential.
Yes. Assessments must be comprehensive. You can't just look at 3 out of 121 machines. You need to use all available intelligence, including known tactics of the specific threat actor involved, like the quantum group's known propensity for data exfiltration, which should have made ACL deeply skeptical of the initial no data loss finding. And assessments must be timely. That 30-day clock for EDB determination is firm.
And finally, the notification piece.
Prompt notification under Section 26 WK2. The takeaway is, don't wait. Don't delay notifying the OAIC and affected individuals while you try to get perfect clarity on every single detail. Once you have reasonable grounds to believe an eligible data breach has occurred, like ACL did on June 16th, you notify as soon as practicable. The court suggests that means days, not weeks. Delay compounds the harm and the penalty.
So M&A diligence, reasonable steps through proper resourcing and basic hygiene, and mature incident response with prompt notification.
Those are the core operational lessons. But there's a broader context, too. This isn't a one-off case. It signals a much more aggressive enforcement stance from the OAIC.
You mean this is just the beginning?
I think so. Look at the landscape. The OAIC currently has ongoing civil penalty proceedings against Optus and Medibank for their massive data breaches, which happened after the ACL breach but before the penalty regime changed. Those cases will be fascinating to watch.
And it's not just about breaches, is it?
No, the regulatory scrutiny is widening. The OAIC has taken action regarding the use of facial recognition technology, think Kmart and Bunnings, and the courts are grappling with the implications of the relatively new statutory tort for serious invasion of privacy, like in the Caraba Group case. Compliance isn't just about ticking boxes anymore. It's an active, high-stakes area facing intense scrutiny.
So wrapping this up, the ACL case really does set a new baseline for accountability in Australia. It puts the emphasis squarely on prevention, getting the fundamentals right, and demands a prompt, competent, and transparent response when things do go wrong.
Absolutely. And Justice Halley's judgment in the federal court made that explicit link. Under-resourcing, poor basic security hygiene. These aren't just technical failings. They directly constitute a serious interference with privacy. That elevates cybersecurity from an IT issue to a fundamental board-level fiduciary responsibility.
Which leaves us, and you the listener, with a final, perhaps slightly chilling thought to consider, building directly on that precedent. The court in the ACL case established liability per individual affected 223,000 contraventions. Now, apply that same methodology to the new, drastically increased penalty regime that came into effect in late 2022. What does that mean for organizations like Optus, which lost data impacting potentially 9.5 million individuals, or Medibank, also impacting millions?
If that per-individual liability model holds under the new $50 million or 30% of turnover caps, well, the potential penalties move from being merely painful to potentially existential for major corporations. That's the question that should be front of mind in every boardroom and security team across the country right now.
A sobering thought indeed. Thank you for diving deep with us today into what is truly a new cybersecurity benchmark set by the ACL case. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.